Gable showed you the thundering diesels, he showed you the churning screws, and he let you draw the obvious conclusion that one powered the other. Every submariner who watched Run Silent, Run Deep in 1958 knew it was wrong. Cary Grant made the same mistake 15 years earlier in Destination Tokyo. The visual language of Hollywood submarine films established a lie that's persisted for 80 years. Diesel engines power the propeller shafts. They don't. They never did. Here's what actually happened inside a Gato-class fleet submarine. The four diesel engines, Fairbanks-Morse 38D818 opposed-piston units, or General Motors 16278A two-strokes, depending on which shipyard built your boat, those engines connected to generators, not propeller shafts. Generators. Each engine produced 1,350 horsepower, and that power went straight into producing electricity. The generators fed current into massive battery banks that occupied entire compartments beneath the crew's feet. The batteries powered electric motors, and only those electric motors turned the twin bronze screws that pushed 1,500 tons of steel through the Pacific. This isn't a minor technical detail. This is the entire architecture of survival. A diesel engine is an internal combustion machine. It needs thousands of cubic feet of air per minute to run. It exhales carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide in equal volume. On the surface, with hatches open, diesels work fine. Submerge the boat and seal those hatches, and a diesel engine becomes a suicide machine. It'll consume every molecule of breathable oxygen in the pressure hull, then fill the compartments with exhaust gas while the crew suffocates. The electric motors didn't need oxygen. They didn't produce exhaust. They drew current from the batteries and turned the screws in silence, hundreds of feet beneath the surface, for as long as the stored electricity lasted, which wasn't very long. 252 lead-acid cells, 126 in the forward battery compartment, 126 in the after battery compartment, arranged in two 63-cell wells per compartment. When fully charged, those batteries could push a Gato-class submarine for 48 hours at a creeping 2 knots. Or they could deliver 90 minutes at maximum submerged speed of 9 knots. That arithmetic governed every combat decision a submarine captain made. Order flank speed to evade a destroyer, and you were spending battery capacity you couldn't recover until you surfaced. The charging cycle imposed its own tactical rhythm. A submarine captain would surface after dark, running his diesels hard through the night while lookouts scanned for enemy silhouettes. The 1,100 kilowatt generators would pour current into the battery banks for hours. By dawn, batteries topped off, the boat could submerge again. Hunt by day, charge by night. That was the tempo of the Pacific submarine war. But here's the thing Hollywood never showed you. The battery compartments were among the most dangerous spaces on the boat. Lead-acid batteries release hydrogen gas during charging. In a sealed submarine, hydrogen accumulates. It reaches explosive concentrations. A single spark could convert the boat into a steel coffin. Every fleet submarine carried hydrogen detectors, ventilation systems designed to draw the gas away from the battery wells. Crews lived with the knowledge that the thing keeping them alive could kill them all in one bright flash. And the men who tended those batteries worked with sulfuric acid in concentrations that would burn skin on contact. They monitored 252 individual cells for voltage drop, electrolyte level, specific gravity readings that indicated charge state. A weak cell in the bank could fail under high current discharge, reducing available power at exactly the wrong moment. The chief electrician's mate on a fleet submarine held the entire crew's survival in his technical judgment. One bad reading, one missed cell, one moment of carelessness with hydrogen concentration. The Hollywood version showed Clark Gable looking grim in the conning tower. It didn't show the electrician's mate crawling between battery wells at 0300, checking specific gravity with a hydrometer, acid burns on his forearms, knowing that a depth charge hit could spray sulfuric acid across the compartment and turn his workspace into a chamber of horrors. The complexity didn't stop at the batteries. A fleet submarine in the Pacific Theater faced an enemy that Hollywood never acknowledged: humidity. Tropical air carried moisture that could short-circuit electrical systems, corrode contacts, and render fire control computers useless. The air conditioning system aboard a Gato-class boat wasn't a comfort feature. It was survival equipment. The system maintained temperature and humidity levels that kept electrical components functional, prevented condensation on torpedo firing mechanisms, and kept the men from heat exhaustion in compartments where ambient temperatures could exceed 100 degrees during surface operations. The maneuvering room, where the motor controllers and electrical switchboards lived, earned the nickname Hell Hole because the heat from the electrical equipment made it nearly unbearable during prolonged surface runs. Men stood watches in temperatures that would shut down a modern factory. The Freon-based refrigeration systems that powered the air conditioning carried their own risks. A leak in the sealed environment of a submarine could displace oxygen or create toxic concentrations. The compressors required constant maintenance, and when the system failed, as systems do under combat conditions, the boat's fighting capability degraded rapidly. Condensation would form on periscope optics. Fire control instruments would drift. Torpedoes could develop moisture in their gyroscopes. Every dive began the same way. The officer of the deck would call, "Clear the bridge," and lookouts would drop through the conning tower hatch. The diving alarm, 2 blasts of the klaxon, would sound throughout the boat. And then came the Christmas tree. That's what submariners called the hull opening indicator panel in the control room. A vertical array of lights, red and green, showing the status of every opening in the pressure hull. Main induction valve, engine exhaust valves, conning tower hatch, torpedo loading hatches. Every one had to show green closed and secured before the diving officer would order the boat under. A single red light meant an open hull penetration. It meant flooding. It meant death. Greenboard became the phrase that allowed a submarine to submerge. 2 words that confirmed 80-plus men could trust their lives to the steel tube around them. The trim dive came next. A submarine doesn't just sink when you flood the ballast tanks. It has to be balanced bow to stern, port to starboard, or it becomes uncontrollable. The diving officer would call for specific angles, and the crew would pump water between variable ballast tanks to achieve neutral buoyancy at periscope depth. Too heavy forward, and the bow would dig toward the bottom. Too heavy aft, and the boat would porpoise, breaking the surface at exactly the wrong moment. Getting it right took practice. Getting it wrong could expose the submarine to enemy eyes at a critical moment, or send it plunging past safe depth before the crew could recover. But all of this engineering brilliance meant nothing without the machine that made torpedo attacks possible. The Torpedo Data Computer. The TDC was an analog computer the size of a refrigerator, packed with cams, gears, differential analyzers, and mechanical solver arms that would calculate the geometry of a moving target and continuously update the firing solution. Pre-war doctrine assumed submarine attacks would be simple: find target, estimate speed and course, fire torpedo, hope for the best. The TDC transformed this guesswork into something approaching precision. Here's the problem it solved. A torpedo moves at roughly 46 knots. A target might be moving at 12 knots on a course that angles away from the submarine. By the time the torpedo travels 2,000 yards to the intercept point, the target will have moved. The TDC calculated where the target would be when the torpedo arrived, not where it was when you pulled the trigger. The operator fed in target bearing, estimated range, estimated speed, and estimated course angle. The machine ground through the trigonometry mechanically, rotating cams that represented the geometric relationships. The output was a constantly updated torpedo gyro angle, the course correction the torpedo needed to swim to hit a target that kept moving. The TDC's Keep True Bearing mode was its most important feature. Once locked onto a target, the system would automatically adjust the firing solution as the submarine maneuvered. The captain could change course, change speed, reposition for a better shot, and the TDC would keep tracking, keep solving, keep updating. When conditions were right, the fire control party would announce, "Solution generated." The captain would order, "Fire!" And then the torpedoes would fail anyway. Because the Mark 14 torpedo should have been the deadliest weapon in the Pacific. Instead, for the first 18 months of the war, it was a scandal of institutional incompetence that cost American submariners their lives and let Japanese ships sail on when they should have died. The problems were multiple, and the Bureau of Ordnance in Washington refused to acknowledge any of them. First, the torpedoes ran deep. The Mark 14 was designed to pass beneath a ship's hull and detonate using a magnetic influence exploder, the Mark 6, that would sense the target's magnetic field and trigger the warhead directly under the keel. Catastrophic damage. Ship-breaking explosions. That was the theory. In practice, the torpedoes ran an average of 11 feet deeper than their settings. A torpedo set for 15 feet would pass at 26 feet, well beneath most merchant ship keels. The magnetic exploder would never sense the hull. The torpedo would swim uselessly past and continue until it ran out of fuel. Second, the magnetic exploder itself was unreliable. When it did sense a target, it often detonated prematurely, too far from the hull to cause fatal damage. Captains would watch their perfectly aimed torpedoes explode in the water short of the target, alerting the enemy and wasting irreplaceable weapons. Third, when captains deactivated the magnetic exploders and switched to contact detonation, they discovered the contact exploders didn't work either. The firing pin was too weak. Torpedoes that struck enemy hulls at the perfect 90-degree angle the textbook shot crumpled their firing mechanisms on impact without detonating. Submarines were expending torpedoes that should have sunk ships. They were revealing their positions to Japanese escorts. They were getting depth-charged for attacks that accomplished nothing. The Bureau of Ordnance insisted the torpedoes were fine. The problem, they said, was the submarine captains. Poor shooting, incorrect procedures, user error. The submarine force knew better. In June 1942, Commander James Fife conducted depth tests at Albany, Australia, firing torpedoes through a submerged net. The results confirmed what submarine captains had been reporting. The Mark 14 ran deep. Adjustments were ordered. But the magnetic exploder problems persisted. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, commanding submarines in the Southwest Pacific, authorized captains to deactivate the magnetic exploders. The Bureau objected. Lockwood overruled them. Then came the contact exploder failures. In September 1943, USS Tinosa found the tanker Tonan Maru No. 3 dead in the water and fired 15 torpedoes at point-blank range. 11 failed to detonate. Commander Daspit returned to port with his last torpedo, so Lockwood could examine the evidence. Lockwood ordered his own tests, dropping warheads from a crane onto a steel plate. The contact exploders crumpled without detonating at 90-degree angles, but worked at oblique angles where the firing pin absorbed less force. The design was fundamentally flawed. A fix was finally implemented in late 1943. 21 months of war, thousands of torpedoes expended, hundreds of attacks that should have succeeded, ships that should have sunk, and men who died in counterattacks that never should have happened because they attacked targets their torpedoes couldn't kill. This is what getting technical details wrong actually costs. Lieutenant Commander Dudley Walker Morton took command of USS Wahoo on December 31, 1942, in Brisbane, Australia. He was 35 years old, born July 17, 1907, in Owensboro, Kentucky. He inherited a boat with a reputation for caution, 2 patrols under previous commanders with limited results. The conservative doctrine of the early war favoured maximum range attacks and immediate withdrawal at the first sign of counterattack. Morton intended to change that. His executive officer was Lieutenant Richard O'Kane, who would later command USS Tang and become the highest-scoring American submarine ace of the war. The two men developed a tactical partnership that transformed expectations for submarine performance. Morton delegated periscope observations to O'Kane, freeing himself to coordinate attacks from the conning tower. Where other captains fired from safe distances, Morton pressed to point-blank range. Where other captains broke contact at the first depth charge, Morton pursued damaged targets until they sank. The down-the-throat shot exemplified Morton's aggressive philosophy. Pre-war doctrine explicitly forbade bow-on shots at attacking destroyers. The geometry seemed to favour the surface ship. A destroyer charging directly at a submarine presents its narrowest target profile, and the closing speed between the two vessels dramatically reduces the time available for torpedo arming. A Mark 14 needed to travel at least 450 yards before its warhead armed. A destroyer charging at 25 knots closed that distance in under 40 seconds. Morton didn't care. When Japanese escorts charged Wahoo's periscope, he would hold position, calculate the shot, and fire straight down the attacker's throat. The psychology was devastating. Escort commanders expected submarines to run. Morton made them pay for their assumptions. In 5 war patrols, Wahoo's 3rd through 7th Morton sank 19 Japanese vessels. The Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee verified 54,683 tons of shipping after the war. 4 Navy crosses. 3 during his lifetime, 1 posthumous. But Morton's record includes something else. On January 26, 1943, during Wahoo's 3rd patrol, he attacked the Japanese transport Buyo Maru. The ship carried Japanese soldiers and Indian prisoners of war. After it sank, Morton ordered Wahoo to surface. He ordered his crew to man the deck guns. What happened next remains contested. American accounts describe suppression of hostile fire from survivors shooting at the submarine. Japanese accounts describe something closer to massacre. The fact isn't disputed. Morton ordered his men to fire on survivors in the water. This speaks to a reality that heroic narratives tend to obscure. Commerce raiding is brutal work. It involves sinking ships full of men who often have no chance to fight back. The men who conducted this campaign weren't angels. They were doing a job their nation assigned them. Some crossed lines that international law had drawn. Morton's tactical brilliance and his potential war crimes exist in the same historical record. USS Wahoo's 7th patrol began in September 1943. Morton took the boat through the Sea of Japan, one of the most dangerous operating areas, accessible only through narrow straits patrolled by Japanese forces. On October 11, 1943, attempting to exit through La Pérouse Strait between Hokkaido and Sakhalin, Japanese anti-submarine aircraft found Wahoo on the surface. 3 depth charges fell. Morton and 80 crew members were lost. In 2006, a Russian dive team located the wreck in La Pérouse Strait. Final confirmation, final resting place. Richard O'Kane survived Wahoo's 4th patrol. He transferred off before Morton's final voyage. In October 1943, he took command of USS Tang. Over the next year, he would prove himself one of the most aggressive and successful submarine commanders of the war, credited with sinking 33 ships for over 200,000 tons. Tang's 5th patrol, in October 1944, took her to the Formosa Strait. On the night of October 24th to 25th, she attacked a Japanese convoy on the surface. The first torpedoes ran true. Ships burned. O'Kane pressed the attack. Tang fired her last torpedo. A Mark 18 electric, supposedly the solution to the Mark 14's problems. The Mark 18 was essentially a copy of the German G7E torpedo, reverse-engineered from a captured specimen. Instead of the Mark 14's steam propulsion, the Mark 18 used a battery-powered electric motor. No wake. No bubble trail to give away the submarine's position. But the Mark 18 carried its own demons. The torpedo's battery compartment generated hydrogen gas during discharge, the same problem that plagued the submarine's main batteries. In rare cases, hydrogen buildup could cause erratic behavior. The rudder mechanisms were prone to jamming. And when a rudder jammed in a turned position, the torpedo did exactly what physics demanded. It ran in a circle. Something went wrong with Tang's last fish. The Mark 18 began a circular run. It curved back toward the submarine that had launched it. O'Kane ordered emergency maneuvers. It wasn't enough. The torpedo struck Tang's stern 20 seconds after launch. The submarine went down in 180 feet of water. 78 men died in the flooding or drowned in the escape attempts. O'Kane and 8 others survived, blown to the surface by an explosion in the forward torpedo room or escaping through the forward escape trunk. They were picked up by Japanese forces and spent the rest of the war as prisoners. The highest-scoring submarine ace of the war, survivor of Morton's legendary patrols, done in by his own torpedo. After the war, O'Kane received the Medal of Honor for Tang's final patrol. He never publicly expressed bitterness about the technical failure that killed his crew and ended his command. The system that failed him was the same system that had failed every submarine commander who'd fired a Mark 14 in the war's first 2 years. Technical details, engineering decisions, quality control. These weren't abstractions. They were the difference between coming home and joining the ranks of eternal patrol. USS Cod was commissioned on June 21, 1943. 7 officers, 69 enlisted men in the commissioning crew. She arrived in Brisbane on October 2, 1943. Over the next 2 years, Cod would complete 7 war patrols, every single one designated successful by Navy evaluation standards. The submarine service suffered a 22% casualty rate among its personnel. Cod's survival was itself a form of distinction. The boat was credited with 26,985 tons of Japanese shipping, respectable, not exceptional. What made Cod's record notable wasn't tonnage, it was sustained competence under pressure. May 10, 1944, 3rd War Patrol. Cod encountered a convoy of 32 ships, heavily escorted. The tactical calculus favoured caution, wait for a straggler, make a conservative attack, withdraw. Cod's commander attacked into the heart of the formation. In the engagement that followed, Cod sank the Japanese destroyer Karukaya and a cargo ship before depth charges forced her deep. She survived. The escorts didn't pursue. The 6th Patrol nearly ended everything. April 26, 1945, operating off Luzon, a fire broke out in the after torpedo room. This is one of the most dangerous emergencies possible aboard a submarine. Fire consumes limited oxygen supply. It can detonate the warheads stored in torpedo racks. The crew fought the blaze in conditions that tested every damage control procedure they'd ever trained for. They saved the boat. One man was lost overboard during the emergency, the single combat-related fatality in Cod's entire wartime career. Her 7th and final patrol took Cod to the Gulf of Siam in July and August 1945. By then, the Japanese merchant marine had been so thoroughly destroyed that finding targets worthy of torpedoes had become difficult. Cod sank 23 junks and sampans between July 21st and August 1st, 1945, in surface actions using deck guns. Not the attacks that made headlines, but they contributed to the strangulation of Japanese coastal shipping in the war's final weeks. Cod came home. She's still here, a museum ship in Cleveland, Ohio, where visitors can walk through the compartments that men once trusted with their lives. USS Legato didn't come home. When Commander Franklin de Vere Latta departed Subic Bay in the Philippines on April 12, 1945, he had every reason to expect another successful patrol. The Gato-class submarine had completed her first war patrol under his command, with aggressive action and no casualties. The Japanese merchant marine was dying. American submarines had sunk so much tonnage that Japan's industrial capacity was collapsing. Latta's service number 0-071545 marked him as part of the interwar generation. Career submarine officers who had entered the service when fleet boats were experimental, undersupported, barely proven. He led a crew of 87 enlisted men and officers, most in their early 20s, many on their first or second patrol. On April 27, 1945, Legato received orders to proceed to the Gulf of Siam, an area of shallow water and restricted maneuverability. The bottom rarely exceeded 50 or 60 meters. A submarine forced deep had little room before hitting the sea floor. Japanese escorts knew this geography. They exploited it. May 3, 1945. The minelayer Hatsutaka, operating on anti-submarine patrol in the Gulf of Siam, detected a submerged contact. The attack occurred in 30 fathoms of water, roughly 55 meters, at coordinates 7 degrees 55 minutes north, 102 degrees 0 minutes east. The depth charges found their target. USS Legato was lost, with all 88 men aboard, Commander Latta among them. The families received telegrams. The names were added to the rolls of those on eternal patrol. For 60 years, nothing more was known. May 15, 2005. British wreck explorer Jamie McLeod led a team of deep-sea divers to a contact in the Gulf of Siam. They found a submarine hull sitting upright on the seabed in 70 meters of water, remarkably intact, periscopes extended, deck gun mounted, hull number obscured by marine growth. In June 2006, Navy divers from USS Salva surveyed the wreck with underwater cameras and remotely operated vehicles. They found a word cast into the bronze propellers: Manitowoc. The Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company in Wisconsin, the yard that built Legato. The rupture in the port bow area told the rest of the story. Depth charge damage, catastrophic flooding. For the families of 87 men, the discovery brought closure that 60 years had denied them. Commander Latter's descendants, including his son, who has searched for information about his father's boat for decades, finally knew where their patriarch lay. The wreck site was designated a war grave, protected from salvage, protected from disturbance. Lieutenant George Grider served as a junior officer aboard Wahoo under Morton. He understood something that his tactical training couldn't fully articulate. Every decision Morton made depended absolutely on the engineering department's ability to deliver power on demand. When Morton ordered flank speed during an attack approach, the men in the maneuvering room had to deliver that power instantly. When he called for all stop during silent evasion, the motor room had to bring 1,500 tons of steel to rest without noise that would betray their position to Japanese sound operators. Forrest J. Sterling served aboard Wahoo as pharmacist's mate first class. His memoir described what the officer accounts missed, the sensory experience of it all. The engine rooms during surface runs. 4 Fairbanks-Morse diesels at full power. The heat that made compartments unbearable. The oil smell that permeated everything. Then, the diving alarm. The sudden quiet when those diesels fell silent was disorienting. The boat's acoustic signature shifted from industrial cacophony to the soft hum of electric motors. The whisper of ventilation fans moving recycled air. That silence kept men alive. The chief motor machinist's mate bore responsibility for the main propulsion motors. The auxiliary machinery that kept the boat habitable, air conditioning, hydraulics, the trim pump system that adjusted ballast during depth changes. The chief electrician's mate oversaw the battery installation, monitoring charge states, checking specific gravity readings, watching hydrogen concentrations. These men didn't just turn wrenches, they held the submarine's survival in their technical judgment. The men who served in these roles came home with injuries that appeared in no official record. Respiratory problems from acid fumes, burns that healed but scarred. Some carried wounds that couldn't be seen at all, the weight of knowing how close they'd come, patrol after patrol, to joining their brothers on eternal patrol. Here's what getting the diesel-electric system wrong actually means. When Hollywood showed you the diesels and the screws and let you draw the wrong conclusion, they erased the central technical reality that defined every submerged hour of a submarine patrol. They erased the battery watches, the hydrogen monitoring, the engineering judgment that kept boats alive. They erased the Christmas tree and the trim dives and the 90-minute battery limit that made every flank speed order a calculated gamble. They erased the TDC operators cranking mechanical computers to solve problems their grandchildren would give to smartphones. They erased the electricians in the hellhole, standing watches in 100-degree heat while the officers enjoyed the air-conditioned control room. They erased the men who made it work. Dudley Morton didn't sink 54,683 tons of Japanese shipping by himself. He did it with electricians monitoring battery cells at 0300. Motor machinists nursing electric motors through attack approaches. Engineers managing the delicate dance between diesel generators and battery banks that gave American submarines their tactical flexibility. Franklin DeVere Latter didn't take Legato into the Gulf of Siam alone. He took 87 men whose technical competence kept the boat operational. Men whose names we know, whose families still search for information, whose service deserves accuracy. The diesel-electric system wasn't just an engineering choice, it was a philosophy. Power generation separate from power consumption. Surface operations separate from submerged operations. Every link in the chain Diesels to generators to batteries to motors to screws required men who understood their piece of the system and trusted the men responsible for the pieces they couldn't see. That chain kept them alive. Or it failed, and they joined the 52 submarines lost in the Pacific War. Getting it right isn't pedantry. It's the minimum we owe the 3,506 American submariners who didn't come home, and the men who did, carrying memories they rarely spoke about. The next time someone tells you diesels powered the screws, you'll know better. And you'll know why it matters.